Redux, y'all. Redux is actually one of my favorite parts of React, TBH. But before we go into all the movable pieces, I know I talked about this a little bit yesterday, but this lecture is going to really happen in 3 parts. We're going to start in a little app that I have called Redux Intro. We're going to go through a few phases. So phase 1 is just talking about message passing. It's a concept that is underneath Redux and is really important just like in CS in general, but it's important to understand how that's working to then understand how Redux is implementing the changes that we're getting to store. Then we'll implement the Redux library and create a store, which isn't actually going to connect to our app at first. So during this version, we're going to see a lot of console logs, but we won't actually see our app behavior change for a bit. But it's an important step before we actually get into step 3, React Redux, which is how we create a store with Redux and actually connect it to our React application and see it then govern state and the behavior for our app. After all of this, I'll give you guys some homework in Sushi Saka to translate it to all the Redux joy. And then tomorrow we'll get into Redux Thumb, which is essentially handling async. Sorry, my brain is doing interesting things today. So as you'll see when we're implementing this, that we don't really have a way to handle asynchronicity. So things like our fetch, where we need to wait for some data to come back and then do some updates to our store, that we won't be able to handle until we get to tomorrow. And these are the core things that I want you guys to have before you start Mod 5, so you can practice them out now. So if Redux is a best practice for your project, if it's going to be helpful for you, you can practice it before you start Mod 5 and have one additional unknown to get through. All right, so like the why of Redux, got a little diagram. And so in this, we've got our 4-level component hierarchy, app being up here. And then I've got this little purple component that's going to initiate some state change that this component right here also needs to know about. There's some state that both of these guys need to know about. Because they both need to know about it, and this guy needs to be able to initiate that change, that means our closest common ancestor is bam, 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 all the way up at app. And so now we have to pass props down 1 level, 2 level, 3 level down to this, and 1 level, 2 level down to there. That is a whole bunch of props to be passing all over the place and just keeping track of, and makes things really annoying. Like, personal little anecdote, when I got to my first job and got thrown onto one project and one of their components was receiving like 15 props, I wanted to cry, because it's just hard to read and hard to keep track of what is coming from where is everything responsible for. With Redux, essentially what it does is I like to think about it as making like a store in the cloud. And that's where everything that is inside of state is going to be. You can still have local state where it's relevant, but a lot of stuff is going to end up in your Redux store if it needs to cross multiple components. You need to all have access to it. This thing then allows each component to determine exactly what does it need to connect to. Which pieces of state does it need to know about? What ways in which does it need to change state? All the rest of the store, it doesn't connect to at all. It doesn't need to know about. Thereby really reducing how many props we have to pass in when a parent renders its child component, and really simplifying, bless you, where do we get those props from? Like super simply. But we'll see this as we build out. It will also test your JS knowledge to the max. This will require you being like very comfortable tracking where things are at and following best practices. So, skipping some of this. Actually, before I keep talking, let me show you the app that we're working in. So we've got this little app. It's got a few basic features. We can dislike, and it will decrement that number. Like, we'll increment the number. Dark mode, just dark mode, light mode, bam, 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 bam. And then I can add in some text. Happy Thursday. Thursday? No, Friday. Thursday is good though. And it will add the text up here, and then when I click add, it clears that and adds it to the bottom of the page. Second phrase. And a third. And it's pre-pending them to the top of that list, just like for good measure. So those are all the behaviors that we're going to implement first using message passing. Now, what is message passing? And so it's a technique for invoking behavior, i.e. running a program on a computer. So I'm not gonna just read this at you guys. The TLDR, too long don't read, is that instead of having multiple functions that all are going to control different behavior, we will have one centralized function. it will receive some information, some action with a type, and that type will determine what does that function then do for us. We have one central function, and we have an action with a type to determine what does it do. It also may receive some data, which we typically call payload. So some of our actions we might just need, and we'll see this, we might just need to know what type of action it is, and we'll be able to handle what does it do. And other things, we'll need some data and a payload. And so I'm just gonna jump in. All right, so let's look at our app. Bam, 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 cool. So this is our itty bitty app that controls dark mode, light mode, dislike, toggle, all that jazz. Right now we have 4 things inside of state, likes, the text that I'm actively writing, and then things as after I hit add, pops into my array. And then I've got multiple different methods here. This is what we're going to use method passing to turn into one thing, just the one. So we've got like, just set state +1, dislike, just set state like -1, toggle, switches dark mode, handle change is getting the text into there, and then add text resets text back to empty, and then adds the text into things. But I don't want this to be a whole bunch of these. I want there to be just one. So I'm gonna call this router for now. I'm gonna say it's going to receive an action. And based on that action.type, I'm doing different languages. Case, let's say case is gonna be like. This is where instead I would do this set state behavior. So I'm gonna call this thing router for now. So we're kind of used to routers from the back end. That we hit the router, it determines where we go. And this time we're gonna do it based on action.type. So we'll go through one by one and switch up this behavior. So like is no longer a method that we need. We can pass in an action. It's gonna be an object with a key of type. Make sure that string is like, and then it will do our set state for us. Now let me prove that it actually works to you guys.
Is action just the generic or reserved like key term?
So is it like actually a reserved word? Can you not use it? Like, does it mean something special? No. Is it like the word that we use there, like to represent action? Yes. It's like action and payload are not reserved, but they are special in how we use them. Just like prev state and prev props.
Okay, gotcha. Because I was wondering if it was closer to like how matches with routing. Or because you know how like you have match is not the best.
Yeah.
In routing props, yeah. But in this case, this is just like your prev state.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
It's akin to that. Yes. Okay.
I was wondering where action came from.
So this is us making an assumption that action will look like type some string here. And then we'll switch off of this type. So what I want to do is I want to go to where we are using this dot like. Cool. And that's not going to be this anymore. Now we're going to call this dot router, and then we have to pass it in that action object with a type of like. And so we've translated now this one method into our router. We'll give them all of the other methods into this one centralized function. Let me prove that this worked first, and then I'll take the question. Sweet, still works. Shoot.
Okay, so action by itself is just going to be like an empty object, and then we're creating a type? Or does it already have a type?
So we are defining our action object.
Okay.
This highlighted piece here is me defining the action object that I will pass in.
Okay.
And so when I define it, I give it a type because I know that my router is expecting that type key to switch off of.
Okay.
To determine its behavior.
It can be like broccoli, like, and then up there make it like case broccoli is like, okay. Gotcha.
Yes, technically, I could do this,
Okay.
but it is standardized, like even in the definition of message passing, that,
A type, yeah.
that it has that central function needs to be told two things: the type of the action, and potentially the payload. It doesn't always need the payload, but it always needs the type. And so that's what we call it.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. All right, so we're gonna build some other cases. Case dislike. Move this baby up here. Comment you out. Let's do dark mode while I'm here too. I'm gonna say case toggle and move up its behavior as well. And now every place that I did this dot toggle or this dot dislike needs to utilize my router instead. And so now down in these on clicks, how I'm calling these is now super standardized. The only thing that changes is the string that's in this type. And again, I'll make sure I didn't break anything and I'm not lying to you guys. Dislike. Whoa.
What is up? Hitting the top case. Oh, is it because?
Breaks. I'm also gonna do a case default pass. No. Or is that a JavaScript Python thing?
It is a trap.
Yeah, that's Python thing.
Why was it hitting the case of toggle?
Why was it hitting the case of toggle?
Yeah.
I think it was just hitting this and then following the every instruction through, which doesn't entirely make sense.
Okay, that makes sense.
All right, there we go.
Okay.
Like, dark mode, light mode, sweet. Okay, so I needed those breaks in there to make sure that it was only hitting one case. Without those breaks, it will just follow through. Okay, so we're close, we're not quite there. We have got two more. I've got case, let's say, change text. And I'm just gonna set this up for now, and then case, add text, break. All right, so then I've got, let's see, change text. I've got this set state that looks pretty similar to these other guys, but now I have this event that I was referencing before that I don't have access to here anymore. This is a behavior that actually needs some data, that event that I'm passing in. So whereas this was called event before, now this is going to be attached to the action as action.payload. I can pass in the entire event there and have it use action.payload as the event, as long as when I call my router, I've made sure that my action both has a type of change text and a payload pointing to the event. All right, so in this guy, it's gonna look like this. Still have the event on the left side. There. This becomes change text, and now I need to also give my action a key of payload. And I can point this to the event. So that I can send my event up to my router as action.payload and give it access to that data. So anytime in this message passing that your central function needs some data, it'll happen as the action payload. What up? And I did not break it yet. All right, and then last things last, move this guy up here. Now, looking over at this code, does this one need a payload?
Okay. You're only changing the state. So that's it. Yeah.
Yeah, So your instinct is right that in this case we don't need any extra data because the things that I'm changing are all based on state already. So I'm changing text just to an empty string, that's fine. And then what I'm updating things to is just based off of state. So I don't need any additional data for this one. And now once I add the invocation of router for this add text, we've centralized all of our behavior into this one function.
I have a quick question.
Shoot.
So you're setting the text to empty, and then you're using this .state.text to create things again. So that is empty at that point.
Yeah, so at this point, whenever you use set state and you're passing in an object like this, it's going to actually calculate what is this value at this point before we've actually updated state. So this update to state has not, bless you, happened when it's reading this line of code and translating, cool, this .state.text is currently whatever I've already typed in. It hasn't been reset yet. I'm having a really hard time finding the input. There's the input. Oh wait, add text. What am I talking about? The button.
Text 150.
Line 50. Yes, thank you. Jeez, that was a struggle bus. Too much code. Add text. All right, let's make sure this works before I go any farther with you guys. And another one. Yes. All right. So this is starting to look like what we're going to use for Redux. And that's why I'm introducing you guys to it this way, is to be like, all right, so what is the core of message passing that's underneath that? Can we essentially write some Redux-like behavior before we start using that library? One thing that I don't like about this is that it's super not dry. We have this SSH all over the place. So instead of having this multiple times, what I want to do is I want to define our new state. That should be outside of here. Cool. Define our new state, have each of these cases decide what new state's going to look like, and at the very end, this set state new state. I want to pull out that behavior from my switch and have my switch just be responsible for calculating what does a new state look like. Which will actually be super simple. It's basically just, no, I took too many of them. New state equals this guy. And so I'm a little bit drier here now. I've just got one set state at the very bottom.
Would it be useful to destructure the other keys that you have there?
Tell me what you mean.
Like you have this .state.text, bangs, dark mode, likes, twice. So I'm wondering, like, if you were to do like destructuring on that, you could do that.
Oh, like up above?
Yeah, like likes, dark mode, bangs, and text all being like destructured. Just to, if you wanted to be more.
Just to clean it up a little bit? Yeah, we could. I'm actually going to split this into a slightly different way, so we'll see that momentarily. Okay, so now we have our switch having one single responsibility of calculating our new state, but I want my entire router to have just that one responsibility, and I'm going to pull the responsibility of actually updating into a different method. This is where we're like really following Redux and what they do. So I'm going to call this guy dispatch. And dispatch is going to be responsible for looking at the action, sending it to the what I'm going to call reducer now. So router has become reducer. Sending to reducer to get what the new state looks like, and then setting state. Its real job is just this guy. It's just going to set state. And reducer is just going to be responsible for what does my new state look like. Calculate, this does the calculations, dispatch makes a change. Done. Calculate. calculate new state. This guy, job. Apply new state. All right, so this guy is also going to take action. And instead of setting state here, we're just going to return new state at the end of reducer. All it's going to do is take the action, decide what's happening in our new state, and return this. Our dispatch is going to utilize it. And just set state, new state. The reason I'm breaking this apart this way is because when we get to Redux, they've essentially written the dispatch for us. And we're just gonna be responsible for setting the rules of how does my state change based on some action. What does my state look like? Here's all the actions I'm expecting it to respond to, and here's what the new state should look like. And it'll do the dispatch for us under the hood. It's written that. All right, let's make sure I did not lie to you. So all of this dot routers become this dot dispatch. And then we check this baby. Dark mode, dislike, super like. We should add a super like button that adds by 10. Here's some text. We have implemented message passing. Excellent. Cool. So these are two key elements of how Redux utilizes message passing. We will write the reducer. This is what we're going to be responsible for when we get into Redux, is just determining, sweet, what does our base state look like? What's our initial state? And then all of the actions I'm expecting my store, like global state, to respond to, if it gets those, how does it change itself? And then Redux does, as React does, some nice under the hood things to actually update that state for us. All right, this is part one. I'm gonna give you guys a 5. Before I give you a 5, I have a question you have to answer in order to leave. So that's what I do, that's what I'm like. So what are the key elements of message passing? Okay, don't give all of them. Jeez.
I'll say number 2 is time.
No, she already said it. It doesn't count. What's something else that the action has? Payload.
What? You need to pass more than one thing, like payload.
In payload? So payload can be absolutely anything, and I like this question. So payload actually in and of itself ends up being an object because I passed an event, but I could send anything as payload. So I could have payload be a string, I could have it be an integer or a bool. I could also pass down in here an object. So I could say, yeah, so if I had wanted to do name and value separately here, I could do that. And sometimes you'll have actions that are going to need more complex payloads, and so you will make it an object. The thing that I like to do is just then standardize. So if I'm expecting my payload to be a simple type, like a string, that I can just automatically use, then I try to do that everywhere. If I'm expecting to have complex payloads, then I will standardize that payload itself is an object. It'll be like text. This is my string. Oh, I feel like I saw your hand.
Yeah, so how you broke it up into two payloads with name and value,
Mm-hmm.
how will the function, because up where we're defining the function, we're calling it action.payload, on both places, how the function will use name there and value?
Sweet. So let's actually break it up that way so you can see like how that would then translate. So where we just had event here as payload, I'm going to instead say name is event.target.name. And payload is, or rather value is event.target.value. So now my action.payload has action.payload.name and action.payload.value.
So that's how you break it up instead of
So now action payload name will point to this value. Action payload value would point to that there. There's a lot of things I think you guys have gotten some decent practice with because of React, of like, where are the props and like where are they being passed from and defined and like tracking all of that. This is another one where that can cause you substantial headache, which is why I would say things like standardize what your payload looks like. This is how I tend to like to do it. Like I make all of my payloads objects by default and then put keys inside of them, because most of my projects, there ends up being more than one piece of data in some kind of payload. And so I know standard, I'm not sometimes just using action.payload point blank, I'm always action.payload some key. But find principles for yourself that work and standardize them so it causes less like human error and confusion for yourself. Okay. Let's see, there's two more things that I would like to get down here for key elements of message passing. So the router, I'm gonna say like router slash reducer just slash like central function. We can call it whatever we want to, but like the key piece of that is that there's some central function that is responding to the action that's being passed. There's one more thing, but it's probably like the least obvious. Just like assumed.
What do you mean by the least obvious?
So the last thing that I have in mind for this is the initial state. Like, what is the thing that we're actually ending? So in this case, we had this dot state, and we're resetting that. But we're always, in whatever case with Redux, going to have our initial state that we are actually ending. When we get this action, we're changing something that already existed to a new version of itself. So those are the key things that I would give you for message passing. Now, I'm going to give you guys 5. And when we come back, we're actually going to jump into, I've already npm installed everything, but using the Redux library and seeing what it gives us instead of just building it all from scratch ourselves. All right, you are free until 10:22. Please be back on time and we'll get started.